I want to start this off by taking a moment to first and foremost introduce myself and talk a little bit more about National Youth Homelessness Awareness Month and what it all means. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Schoen. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Breaktime, um, and we're recognizing the start of National Youth Homeless Awareness Month today because it is a month dedicated to recognizing that the struggles that young adults experiencing homelessness endure have been met with a lack of awareness and compassion. And it's really critical for us to engage in consciousness raising of these challenges because they're not issues that are commonly talked about. And I think the issues that youth and young adults face with homelessness in particular are unique and warrant us to think differently about how we solve these challenges. And that's a lot of what we're going to be diving into today. A study by the University of Chicago states that 1 in 10 young people ages 18 to 25 in the United States experience some form of homelessness in a given year. That's over 4 million young people every single year who are touched by this issue in some way. And I like to lead with that stat because I think it really goes to show how homelessness is an issue that we think of traditionally in a very narrow sense of folks who are actively living on the streets or in shelters. But it's an issue that touches so many more people, folks who are couch surfing, folks who are in transitional living situations. And for young people in particular, at a really critical point in their lives where they're transitioning into adulthood, transitioning into a career, this is a challenge that all too often is affecting folks. We're going to dive more into that today and some of the root causes of this issue. But to provide a bit more background on Breaktime and sort of why I come to this work, I started Breaktime back in 2018 after seeing the immense barriers that young adults face in obtaining stable employment on top of their struggles with housing insecurity. It's really a cycle. Young people in these situations don't have the housing security they need to maintain employment and therefore don't have the financial or job security they need to maintain housing. I used to work at a youth shelter called Idowu, incredible shelter based in Cambridge. And through that experience, I just saw so many young people who would have a job for 3 or 4 weeks, but they would lose that job because they didn't have the supports and stability in place to sustain it. And they wouldn't get into long-term housing because they didn't have a job, and these housing programs require that you have a job. And so this creates what's called the cycle of young adult homelessness, something that we're trying to break here at Breaktime by providing both transitional employment and financial empowerment to young people experiencing homelessness. Like I said, Breaktime was started back in 2018. If we fast forward 5 years later, we are now actually launching our statewide expansion campaign, working to make sure that young adults all across the state of Massachusetts have access to our program and programs like ours. This October, we officially launched in Metro North. Many of you were there to celebrate with us, which means the world to us. And we're beginning to pilot in longer term in other regions as well. And I really think that what's so critical about tonight and taking a step back to think about young adult homelessness as a whole is that as folks who are key supporters and allies doing this work, that we continue to educate each other on what's going on in this field, learn from one another about how we can better be engaging our peers and doing the work to combat young adult homelessness. Because while Breaktime's focused on ending this cycle right here in Massachusetts, this is an issue that's nationwide, that's international, and our ability to engage our friends, our peers, our communities, our networks in combating this issue is so important. So to give a little bit more context on Breaktime, for those of you who don't know, we have a 3-part program. It starts with something called Launchpad, which is 3 weeks of job readiness and financial literacy training. Then there's Liftoff, which is a 3-month job placement at a local nonprofit or small business. And then finally, Stable Orbit, which is 3 years of alumni support, really helping young people to get the job, financial, and housing security they need for the longer term. We're so excited to be able to do this work in partnership with so many other nonprofits and small businesses in the community, also in deep partnership with the city government here in Boston and the state government. This is such a collaborative effort because we cannot do this alone. Young adult homelessness, like I said, it's a huge issue that's affecting millions of young people nationwide. It's something that requires unique solutions, unique investment. And this work is really about preventing long-term chronic homelessness, because unfortunately, young people who experience homelessness when they're 18, 19, 20, these are the folks who are most likely to experience it longer term. And every day that passes, a young person is 2% more likely to experience chronic homelessness if they continue to experience homelessness as a youth. And so that's why it's so important that collectively we continue to work to educate our peers in doing this work. And as part of the month of November, as part of awareness building throughout this month, we're also raising money to support Breaktime's efforts in breaking the cycle of young adult homelessness. We'll drop a link in the chat, but we're extremely grateful for the support of our good friends, Jeff Munger and Rob Whitman, who graciously offered to match every single dollar up to $15,000 from now until the end of the month. And so if you're compelled today to support our work, please do, and please share with your friends. Again, I think the two biggest ways that you can help us out right now in ending young adult homelessness are through spreading awareness and continuing to support our work financially. But without further ado, I really want to move towards introducing some of my co-panelists, who are incredible individuals that I really look up to and who I think have very unique perspectives on this issue. In particular, my first co-panelist of the night is Prince, who is currently in our Liftoff programming. That's our 3-month job placement. And he's working at an incredible small business here in the Boston area called Cityscapes, which does interior and exterior plantscaping company. They actually do all the plants for us here in Breaktime and for so many other businesses. So hi, Prince, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello. How's everybody doing today? Hope everybody's doing good.
Thank you. So really, Prince, I'd love to just have you share with folks a little bit more about your story and how you got to Breaktime in the first place.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. So with me, I'm from Dorchester, Boston originally. Hello, everybody. And so I'm from the city. And growing up, I grew up in the inner city that makes you grow up a certain type of way for certain people, and you grow up in certain neighborhoods type thing. So unfortunately, I had to go to DYS when I was younger, like when I was about 15, and I had a little cycle of going back and forth. So just now, when I was about 18, I'll say, 19, I'll say, I had gotten out of DYS, and I had a company helping me, which is called the Home for Little Wanderers, which I got branched to by DYS. And pretty much they were helping me because I was facing homelessness and I didn't really have anywhere to stay because my mother moved to Florida and I couldn't go with her because I couldn't be on her lease technically. And there's just a lot of stuff that goes with that. But so I was couch surfing for a little while, stuff like that. They were housing situation for a while, for about like a year. I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment under them. But after that, when I had just aged out of that little situation for a while, like even right now, I still don't have anywhere. Technically, I'm staying in a hotel right now. But besides that hotel, which I was blessed to get between some other people that looked out for me, which I didn't even pay for, besides that, I wouldn't have anywhere to stay, honestly, really. So I'm facing the same situation. And Breaktime, honestly, I got branched to Breaktime through Home for Little Wanderers. And once I got there, it was just different. Like, they connected me to the job Cityscapes I have now, which I always said I would never work at a warehouse ever again because I've worked at a warehouse job before and it wasn't really for me. But this is completely different. And I really do enjoy my job. And I feel like it was a lot for me to get connected to break through Home for Little Wanderers because even though Home for Little Wanderers couldn't help me anymore, now Breaktime, they're connecting with a lot more resources where there's things that I could apply for once I find an apartment where they could help me with moving fees and things like that. And a whole lot of things that I wouldn't have known of if I was by myself. And they also helped me get a job that I really do like. And I'm not like just going to work just to get a check. I enjoy what I do and I enjoy the people I work with. So that's just a little bit about me. I don't want to talk too much, but that's a little bit about me and how I got connected to Breaktime.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Prince. And I appreciate you sharing a bit about your job experience so far. How is the experience of being stably employed with Cityscapes? Oh, I think Prince dropped off. Oh, Prince is back. Prince, can you hear us still?
Hello?
Can you hear me, Prince?
Hello?
Can you hear me, Prince?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can hear you guys, but you guys wasn't able to hear me.
No worries.
I don't
Prince
know
is
what
actually
just
just
happened.
you're just getting out of work for the day, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's why I'm in my car right now.
No worries. So if connection works, I just want to ask you one more question, which is just how has the experience of being stably employed with Cityscapes um, affected your life recently?
For me personally, it's like not to sound cliche or anything, but it just helped me see like there's a lot more positive when it comes to actually working because like I said, situations that I come from, I'm not really people don't preach like, oh, go get a job, go work. Like they just I'm taught to just go get it by any means necessary. So in this way, they've shown me like there's people that you could actually work with that actually care for you. There's actually genuine people out here. And like I said, through the graces of God, I'm actually staying in a hotel with somebody. I don't want to put anybody out there or anything, but with people through my job that I've got through break time. So if it wasn't for that, I'd probably literally be staying in my car right now. So I'm so grateful for that. And honestly, like my experience, I can't say anything negative about it, honestly. Like not to sound cliche, not to sound like I'm just trying to up the program or anything, but break time, they really just like everything they taught me because I had to grow up pretty early. So everything they taught me, I kind of already knew, except for like the paperwork aspect of it, like emails and resumes and stuff like that. Besides that, they reiterated everything to me and made it so I could understand it a little bit more when I'm going into this. And then once I got to break time, they just really showed me like, just do what you do and be good at your job and you'll be rewarded because there's people out here that's watching and that actually care. And that's pretty much like my feedback on it.
Awesome. Well, Prince, we're so grateful that you are joining us today after a long day of work and everything that you're going through. I'm just so excited that I get to work with you, Prince, and um, you've been such a special addition to the Breaktime family and make us all better and stronger. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all you do, and I'm so glad to hear that the experience has been working out so far.
Thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming out to hear my story, for giving me a platform just to speak real quick. And for everybody that's saying stuff in the comments, appreciate you in the chat. I mean, thank you, Connor, again for everything, for the opportunity, for everything. And I'll let you guys continue. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Prince. And thank you especially to Cityscapes. I know Jan Goodman's on the call today for making this opportunity possible. All of our job placements happen through partnerships with local nonprofits and small businesses. And this really leads me to introducing my next speaker, Segun Idowu, who's the City of Boston's Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. I think the issue of young adult homelessness is something that we can't just address by thinking of it as a housing issue. These issues are all about economic inclusion, all about economic opportunity. So to start, Segun, I guess for people on the call, I'd love for you to speak to what does it mean to be the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion for the City of Boston?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And I apologize in advance. We're getting a new elevator, which may not mean a whole lot to folks on the call, but to City of Boston employees, this is a very important moment for our building that we're getting a new elevator. So you're going to hear some construction noises going on now that it's after 5. But Connor, very much appreciate the opportunity to be here, especially to follow Prince. And you know, there's 2,000, I'm not trying to steal no one, but there's 2,000 openings at City of Boston. So if if interested in another job. Anyway, so what does it mean to be Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion? Not much to my mother, but in terms of the folks here, it means that I have the ability to lead a strong team of about 100 folks over 5 different departments that include global affairs and supplier diversity, small business, our tourism agency, licensing, et cetera, to help make Boston a more vibrant, resilient, sustainable city that is centering its residents. And to what you said earlier, we're creating opportunities to build generational wealth. So that's what we're doing every day.
Awesome. Well, thank you for explaining that. I think even as someone who knows city bureaucracy very well, it can get confusing, especially when the names change on you. So I guess my second question really is, I mean, what do you see as your department's role in addressing issues such as young adult homelessness, given the interconnectivity between these issues and issues of economic opportunity and inclusion?
Well, I mean, that's what you said, right? I mean, it's not just that when we're attacking this problem, it's not just about making a place to lay your head and grow your family, like to make that available. It's also giving people the opportunity to have meaningful, not just jobs, but careers. I mean, that's the real interest of our team here is, yes, there are many jobs available, but we want to help people feel fulfilled. And so, our role, I mentioned it, half jokingly, not really to Prince, but also there are 2,000 openings here in the city of Boston. And, maybe we're doing this right now live on this call, but Connor, would be great to have a conversation, connect you with our chief people officer to talk about, how can we utilize that opportunity to help connect people to stable career opportunities that are providing, good wages, excellent benefits, and again, opportunities to grow yourself and potentially your family.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking when you mentioned the job opening space. I mean, like I said, we're always partnering to create these job opportunities. We see them as an entry point into the workforce. And even for folks after their 3-month job placement, some folks will stay longer term at that same employer, and other folks will be looking for another opportunity or a next step, a credentialed program, post-secondary education. So always trying to get creative about what those career pathways look like. And as you said, working folks towards, helping folks work towards family sustaining jobs. And I guess my last question here is, why do you think innovative workforce solutions like Breaktime's program are so important to addressing homelessness and other issues that you're seeing in the city today?
Well, and I know that I think we should be using this time to big up Breaktime. First of all, the rest of the world is doing it. And, as a homegrown organization, we love to see, organizations that are here in Boston really leading on the world stage in what is possible to help all of our residents here. So when I think of what Breaktime is doing, at the end of the day, it is a holistic approach, which, I think we see the rest of the city, the Commonwealth, and the world kind of moving toward that, even though there's a particular issue you're trying to address, it's not just that issue. It's not just the job of the people with that issue in their title to address. It is all of us together. So I think of Mayor Wu, who, has a very clear vision for what the city of Boston should look like, but it's not, whether it's climate resilience, affordable housing for all who are here, and addressing our transportation challenges. But it's not just the streets cabinet, not just the mayor's office of housing, not just Reverend Mariama's shop in energy, environment, and open spaces that are tackling these problems in silos. It is literally the entire cabinet working together with these three at the head leading to address the issue. And so I think of that model and what Breaktime is doing, and that, yes, you are seeking to address a particular issue, but you're seeing how all of these other components in the life of a person interact and intersect and have to also be addressed if you want to achieve success. So if you want to get someone in a home, we have to think about what income they have coming in, but also what other kinds of skills they have, just not just job skills, but also life skills. And so, I think what you all are doing is really important. And, I know we had conversations a little bit ago about even how do we plug the organization into our main streets? Because, in addition to addressing the youth homelessness problem, and, we're also connecting people to jobs, but also in the communities that we seek to have people live, and then also addressing the jobs problem for this small business. And so it's like you're not just tackling one problem. Actually, Breaktime is tackling a whole lot of problems in our society. And so that's why here at the City of Boston, we're proud to work in partnership with you.
Well, I really appreciate that because, I look up to you and the work that you do in your office. And I think it's incredible how collaboratively the city across departments is operating right now to think about addressing so many challenges, including the challenge of homelessness. So thank you so much for being with us here today. I saw a couple questions in the chat about applying to jobs in the city. So hopefully you get yourself a few more applicants for those jobs. And I'm excited to talk more about how we could plug into pipeline some of our young people into those positions.
Thank you. Yeah, it looks like Daniel's here too, so he's gonna provide some information on that. But I do want to thank you, Connor, and the other piece that you all are doing. If I can just say, we have this whole downtown revitalization plan, and thank you, Breaktime, for being located in our downtown area and helping to generate economic prosperity for folks down here. So thank you very much, and we'll answer these questions in the chat, and folks can feel free to reach out to me. It's just my first name dot last name at boston.gov. Always happy to be helpful and point folks in the right direction.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Segun, for being with us here today. And my next co-panelist who will speak, who I'm thrilled to introduce, is Senator Lydia Edwards. Lydia Edwards has spent her career as an advocate, activist, and a voice on behalf of Massachusetts' most vulnerable. We're honored to now have her as our state senator for where Breaktime is located, and also for some of the communities around Boston. And we're honored that we've gotten to work with her in events in the past. So welcome, Senator Edwards. It's so great to see you today. No, we can't.
I'm gonna say, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So my first question for you is, what is the role of the state government in breaking the cycle of young adult homelessness?
We have several points. One, it's holding state agencies that are dedicated to housing people accountable. I would say, actually, before we even go there, the state government should really adopt the sense and believe quite firmly that housing is a human right. And then center all of our policies, all of our accountability, all of our conversations around that, and really understand that the dignity of people and the sense of self-worth is often dependent on the ability for them to have a place to lay their head at home and call home. And so we need to not just hold state agencies accountable. We need to push policy that's centered in that it's a right to have housing. Therefore, it should be more affordable. There should be an abundant amount of housing. And we need to center it on the most vulnerable who need it. That includes people with disabilities, our youth, people who are addicted or have addiction or substance issues. These individuals, if you can house those groups of people, you can house anyone. But oftentimes we house the ones with the most money and then hope that housing will trickle down to those who need it the most.
Absolutely. So, and I appreciate that you're working on this on a state level now after having been a city councilor here in Boston, because as someone who grew up in Massachusetts, leading an organization that's now expanding statewide, we know that this is an issue that exists all across the state. A report recently out of Chapin Hall talked about how rural homelessness is felt just as strongly as urban homelessness, but there's not the resources available to those folks to address it. So my next question for you is, what are some of the things that you're working on now in your job as a state senator that you think will, some of the specific actions that you're taking that you think will address this issue across the state?
Sure. Well, right now we're pushing very excitedly to get the economic development bill passed, which has it includes a lot of not just earmarks but funding, hundreds of millions of dollars for housing alone, preventing evictions, also providing rent assistance, all of which we still do need. We are still in this pandemic. A lot of people want to think, I want to think that we're no longer in this, but honestly we are, and we need to house people. We're also moving towards assessing how we are housing people in the suburbs and building appropriately and following civil rights guidelines. And that's kind of wonky, but ultimately, we need to build not just more housing, but more affordable housing everywhere, from Wellesley to Fitchburg to Boston to Cambridge, so on and so forth. And then finally, well, of the many things we're doing, we're really looking at, because oftentimes when I work at the Office of Housing Stability, a large section of the youth that were homeless were of the LGBTQ community, and were homeless due to hostile environment and trauma that they could not stay at home. It was not an option to be at their original home. And so for many of us, it's really using trauma-centered care when we meet somebody at any point in the and really changing our policies to deal with the person and the trauma that they're dealing with, not just the maybe crime that they committed and not just the vagrancy that they have. That's not what you're supposed to deal with. That was the opportunity for you to help somebody who is dealing with trauma.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing the chat, Plymouth, definitely another community that needs more affordable housing. So let me just say, Senator, I'm honored that Breaktime is in your district. We're honored to partner with you in making these things happen. Like I said earlier, this is such a big issue that we all are needed to advocate and to push and collectively work together to address it. So I'm very eager to continue to partner with you and your office to break the cycle of young adult homelessness here in Massachusetts.
Thank you. We got a lot of work to do and a new session to do it in with a new governor. Can't wait for her.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator Edwards. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for everything you do.
All right, bye.
Thank you. So the last two speakers for today's discussion are two advocates on the national level, because as I've mentioned, this issue goes beyond Boston, goes beyond the state of Massachusetts, and is really national. We're honored to partner with folks from all around the country in addressing young adult homelessness. And 1 in 4 young people who age out of the foster care system experience homelessness within 4 years. Actually, some data suggests that 40% of young people here in Massachusetts who exit the foster care system are experiencing some form of homelessness after coming out. And so what we're seeing on a national level and here in Massachusetts is really a connection between the foster care system and homelessness, as folks without family support, without financial support, are expected at very young age to transition into adulthood, losing the supports they had as a youth, and now trying to figure their way out in the world as a young adult without that support. So I'm really honored to introduce my next guest, who I introduced recently because of his book, A Place Called Home. A Place Called Home is honestly one of my favorite books that I've ever read, and that's not an exaggeration. I called David right after I had read it because, as someone who has been doing this work over the last 5 years, it's something that spoke to so many of the things that are so important to know about this issue. So we are incredibly honored to have David Ambroz on the call with us today to talk a bit about his book, his experiences, and the things that we can really learn from David. So thank you so much for being here today, David.
Absolutely.
And for my first question, in an interview recently, you said, "I refuse to be made invisible again." And that really, I think, struck a lot of people on my team, and I think is a message that resonates with a lot of people. But I'd love to hear firsthand from you a bit more about that and how you think the challenges that youth and young adults experiencing homelessness face make them feel hidden and invisible in this day and age.
Yeah, so I tell a quick story and then a modern moment. So I was born into homelessness. It was my normal for 12 years from birth until I entered foster care. And I was about 4 or 5 living in Grand Central, and I was begging. And we had been living there, and I was, in a filthy state with all sorts of issues with regards to my health and lice. And I was begging to the morning commuters coming off the rush hour, and none of them looked at me, but a space opened up on this packed concourse so folks could avoid being anywhere within 2 feet of me, which meant they had to jostle each other. And no one looked at me. And I realized in that moment that I was completely invisible to these people. And that's really the state of our homelessness today. We shrug our shoulders and think one of two thoughts, both at once usually, which is, I'm a little annoyed that this is in my face. And simultaneously, I'm sure someone's going to come and fix this. But we are those people, and we need to come fix this. So the invisibility was and is, I think, a real state of affairs for our homelessness crisis in this country. The worst part to me is that kids don't vote, and homeless kids will be homeless unless we have healthy, happy families that are in communities not of poverty, but of richness in all areas, opportunity, aspiration, safety. And that just does not exist. We have an ecosystem that produces homelessness called foster care, as you noted the statistics. But even more broadly, we have a big problem, which is, 8.4 million children live in poverty in this country. An incalculable number of people. And yet in the presidential debates in our country, we haven't used the phrase child poverty since 1999. We talk about coal miners at every single debate, but we don't talk about children. And so unfortunately, the most vulnerable of that, to me, way out on the branch, tipping the limb, are foster children and kids coming out of delinquency and dependency, that we just have this lubricated slide into abject poverty, misery, death. And I was struck that recently I learned that more kids will become homeless than go to college, 2-year, 4-year, whatever. More kids will die coming out of foster care than go to college. More young women will become pregnant within 2 years than go to college. Are those stats we're comfortable with? And if we're not, we can do better. All of this is in front of us, and yet we do nothing. So I think efforts like yours and the folks on this call are great. I think we need to build up our community, rally the public to make this the front and center issue of our time.
Absolutely. I could not have said it any better. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Awareness is so important here, because I think what you're sharing, David, around the foster care to homelessness pipeline is not something that's well known. Mm-hmm. And it is something that, I think if we can get more people to know about it, if we can get more people to know about this issue, we can rally more support, as you're saying, get it spoken about more, and hopefully rally more advocacy around changing these systems. So one follow-up question I wanted to ask based on that is, your book takes place throughout roughly the first 22-ish years of your life. And so we get a perspective on how things were then, how your experience was in the foster care system, experiencing homelessness, transitioning into you eventually going to college, which is incredible. But I'd love to hear sort of how you've seen things change since, since you graduated college, since you've started to become more engaged in advocacy. How have you seen leaders' perspectives change, and what is the progress that we still need to see from our leaders? And, what's the next step for our society?
Wow. Connor, let me just contradict everything I just said. Are you ready? Are you seated? We have the best system in our country's history, the most fair, equitable, and transparent, with the best outcomes we've ever had. If we constantly scream fire, no one wants to run into that voluntarily. We have to acknowledge the victories and successes we've had as a community. And by community, I mean vulnerable children in poverty, which means families in poverty. We recently, under President Trump, of all presidents, signed the most important legislation of foster care reform, which is to preserve families. And granted, it was part of an omnibus bill, and maybe, it's debatable whether or not it was visible to him and his administration, but he signed it. And what it does is it allows, for the first time ever, states to use money to preserve families instead of 2/3 of the families being broken up with their kids removed into foster care because of neglect, we can now use funding to preserve those families. Neglect is a euphemism for poverty, which is a euphemism for racism. So we were removing 2/3 of these children into a pipeline, into a system that was grinding away hope. Instead, we can begin to do something different. The states have to do that work. And a lot of the states that you might imagine have not opted in to use that funding differently. So there is such a differentiation across the country in terms of that plan and platform. Another aspect, when I was coming up in foster care in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I was put through a rather rigorous attempt to make me not gay. And I think, it wasn't until President Obama's second term that the federal government stopped reimbursing states for that, which was a policy change I was proud to be part of with Land Illegal and Children's Child Welfare League of America. It's better. We have to acknowledge it's better, but we also have to understand that better doesn't mean we should rest. Listening to even the folks today, jobs, benefits, hopelessness, college access, all of these things we can keep going. In my lifetime, we've halved the number of kids living in poverty in this country. Let's keep going. So what has changed? A lot, and for the better. And if we want to bring the public along with us, we can't be the doomsayers because people don't want to go to that party. We have to communicate the full story. And the full story is hope, optimism, and we can. And that's what I try and do with my own advocacy is, yes, acknowledge the truth, but that's not the whole truth. The whole truth is complicated and messy. And we have to start thinking about communicating to the broad public if we want to create a fertile ground to plant our saplings.
Absolutely. And I think, for folks who read the book or folks who are going to read the book, you'll see how David at a very young age began to advocate for some very significant reforms. You talked in your book a bit about the advocacy you were doing in DC. I think as a teenager around making sure that the federal government was paying for things like foster care, youth who are transitioning out of foster care to have stipends to support them because they don't have parents who have money or intergenerational wealth or any of these things to support them. And so what are some of the other reforms now that you think that people should be aware of and that they should be advocating for?
Let's build dorms at community colleges across the country so foster youth emancipate into a college education, a vocational degree, and housing. We own the land. You don't have to build parking. You can reach scale with a few folks per room, just like my college dormitory experience. Not going to be right for everybody. But when we begin to think about the pipeline, a great way to end homelessness for youth is to build housing. Great way to have housing that actually leads to something other than intergenerational poverty is to give skills. I drive by Bunker Hill Community College and I see beautiful buildings being built. And I think, let's build a 10-story dorm and house every single emancipating kid in Boston for 3 years while they figure their stuff out. Why don't we dual enroll them while they're still in high school? Not going to be right for everybody. But a lot of high school students don't want to study algebra. Maybe they want to study welding. Boston and the Commonwealth have a plethora of lawyers and bioengineers. We cannot find a plumber for our life of us. Why don't we start looking at the vocational gap and the opportunity we have for folks that don't want to pursue traditional education and really lift up our youth into these amazing careers and fields? Let's honor blue collar work and also support youth that want to go to 4-year or pursue a bachelor's, et cetera. We have the land, we have the educational institutions. There's so many opportunities and ideas that we just need to better deploy our resources that are just there in front of us. And all that is about 10 people that have to say yes to that idea I just said. 10 people. I was the president of Planning Commission in Los Angeles. A building of this sort is between $50 and $100 million one time. How much do we spend every year on homelessness? Let's go big, let's go bold. And we could also then look at other populations that are vulnerable, like undocumented youth, veterans, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just one idea. My afterword of my memoir is a policy love letter to a would-be governor or state senator who's going to one day become senator that might pick it up and run with it. And I'm chock full of it. So any questions, if folks can reach out to me, that's fine too. But I just am so bullish and optimistic. We've made great progress. We just need to go a little further.
Absolutely. And in 2018, the federal government was spending $35,000 per individual experiencing chronic homelessness.
Wow.
And that's for folks, per year. And so a lot of folks who are experiencing chronic homelessness will experience that for decades. you scale that cost over a lifetime, it could be with inflation as high as $2 million per person. So
Yeah.
the $50 million you mentioned could be talking about 25 individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. So,
and we have to pair the moral, the economic, you've nailed. These are our children. It's moral and economic, both. And we should do that, especially in a state like, in a commonwealth like Massachusetts, which has such a big heart and is so beautifully purple.
Absolutely. And I think one of the best ways to hear more about both the ways that you can advocate and to hear an incredibly compelling story about this issue is to read David's book, A Place Called Home. The link was dropped in the chat, but I highly, highly recommend it. I think it's incredible. And I really appreciate, David, you being here with us today to share more perspective. And even if you just read the afterword was like, honestly, the most effective sort of few pages of a call to action that I've ever seen. So I highly recommend going out there and reading it. So to close out tonight's speaking portion, we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. I'm really honored to introduce our next guest. As I mentioned, homelessness is a nationwide issue. And it's not only affecting young people transitioning out of the foster care system, but it's also, as David mentioned, affecting LGBTQ plus young people, both those transitioning out of the foster care system, those who are kicked out of their parents' homes at 18, at 19, even older, because of the way they identify. And I'm honored to introduce someone who has been at the forefront of fighting the issue of LGBTQ plus youth homelessness, and someone who's a personal inspiration and inspiration to many of us in this field, Carl Siciliano, who is the founder of the Forney Center in New York, an organization that has grown to be the largest and most comprehensive program for LGBTQ plus youth experiencing homelessness. Carl, thank you for joining us today as one of our national partners in this work, and we're just so honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with all of you.
Awesome. So I wanted to kick it off by just asking you, why do you think building awareness around the issue of LGBTQ plus youth homelessness is so important? And do you feel like it's something that people know about?
Well, I mean, I think if human beings are important, then being aware that hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ youth are suffering homelessness in our country right now is obviously important. I think the awareness of the issue has grown over the last 20 years ago was when I started the Forney Center, and I think that there's vastly more awareness now than there was at that point. At the time that I started the Forney Center, I felt like I was this voice in the desert, like even in the LGBTQ community, that just very few people were aware of the issue. But having said that, the gap between the number of young people who need housing and support and the amount of housing and support that's out there is just appalling. I'd like to share a few personal stories that homeless youth have told me about what it means to be homeless in different parts of our country. You know, I went out to visit with some folks who were interested in developing a drop-in center for homeless youth in Anoka, Minnesota, not too far from Minneapolis. And you know, I met with a young woman who had spent months on the streets waiting to get into the one shelter for youth that was in Minneapolis. It was a 10-bed shelter. You know, and she talked about sleeping in boxes and it's so cold in the winter in Minneapolis that she would, you know, cry at night, like terrified that she would freeze to death before she would wake up in the morning. And then I remember when I was meeting with this larger group in Anoka, I was asking them, well, they were telling me that they had identified over 2,000 LGBT homeless youth in their school system in Anoka and Hennepin counties, and that there were these 10 beds for all of homeless youth in Minnesota. And so I said, well, what did the police do when they find a homeless youth? And they said that what they do in their town is the police bring them to this highway, where they drop them off at a truck stop, thinking that they're either going to prostitute themselves to the truck drivers or hitch a ride to Chicago, where there are at least some homeless youth shelter services, though not nearly enough. That was really shocking for me to hear. I remember a young man that I spoke to who talked to me about what it meant to be homeless in the outskirts of Atlanta. His aunt said that he was a demon because he was gay, and she put him out. He had no money. He was, maybe 20 miles from Atlanta. He didn't know what to do. He just went out into the woods and sat there in the woods for 3 days, not eating, not drinking. Finally he passed out from dehydration. Thank God he came out and passed out on a street, because if he'd passed out in the woods, he would have died. I think of a young woman in Virginia, a transgender woman, who told me how, when her military mother found her wearing makeup, she threw her out in a town that had no youth shelter or any kind of housing support for homeless youth. And she had an experience that a number of young people have told me about, similar kinds of stories. A guy took her in, but the payment for her staying with him was that she had to have sex with his friends, and they would line up at night and take turns, just raping this 15-year-old girl. So a lot of youth are forced into really exploitative sexual situations because of the lack of housing. So I think that there's a true crisis in this country. I don't know that I've looked at the statistics recently enough. I should have done this right before I got on this, but the last time I checked, there were about 6,000 housing units in the country for unaccompanied minors. And a conservative estimate would be that there are 1 million youth who experience homelessness. So, there's just not nearly enough housing, and it's forcing youth into really desperate, degrading, terrorizing, awful situations. And it's just a scandal and a disgrace. I do agree with what David said before, that things have gotten better. It's just, that the better is small, and it needs to be so much bigger, and it needs to be so much more robust. There are a lot of states in this country that only have 5 or 10 beds for their homeless youth. And there's no state in this country that doesn't have thousands of homeless youth.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. And, for folks who don't know, 40% of young people experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ+. It's an issue that's disproportionately affecting its population. And as Carl said, millions of young people are facing these issues, and we don't have the resources to support all of them. But organizations like the Forney Center, which Carl started, and organizations like Breaktime are doing what we can to move this work forward. And Carl, we're just so grateful to have you here today to share your perspective, and excited to continue to find ways for us to work together.
Well, it's an honor. Can I add one thing?
Yes, of course.
2 years ago, I stepped down as the director of the Forney Center, but I continue to be involved. I'm overseeing our efforts to provide technical assistance and support to groups around the country and around the world who are in the process of developing housing for homeless LGBTQ youth. And we're working with amazing groups in places like Kansas City, in Oklahoma, and Arkansas, in the Black Hills of South Dakota. There are groups all around the country. I'm working with groups in Poland, in Nigeria, in El Salvador. It's actually amazing to see how many people are stepping up and responding to this issue. And one thing that I would really recommend the participants and folks listening to this do is just Google, like, you know, where to homeless youth in your state, in your locality, get help, and help the organizations that are doing this work. Everybody is struggling for money. You know, the gap between what the need is and what they have to provide is so extraordinary. But there are good folks all over the country and all over the world who are, you know, really trying to respond to the needs of homeless youth in their localities, and they really need support.
Absolutely. And we have a list of partners from around the country that we work with. It doesn't cover every single state, but for some of the folks on the call, including some of our partners, we can definitely send that out. So thank you so much again, Carl, for being with us. Really appreciate it. And because we just have a few minutes left here, I think we're going to wrap, and then folks who have questions will leave contact information for you to reach out. But I hope that today has been a learning experience for everyone. Really, you know, I learned things today, and I think what I really wanted folks to get from today's conversation is just the multifaceted issue that young adult homelessness is, the different causes that feed into it, from coming from the foster care system, being LGBTQ+, to the different challenges that folks face when experiencing homelessness, such as Prince, who you heard from, and David, to the solutions that we should be looking towards to address this issue, and the different ways in which different directions from which we should be going at this thing. We heard from Segun about how this is a workforce and a labor issue. Heard from Senator Edwards about some of the work that she's doing to advocate for housing and other changes in the state legislature. And so I hope that this gave some perspective about the complexity of young adult homelessness, but also gave folks some takeaways that they can share with their networks. Because I think most importantly, you know, it's a wonderfully sized group on this call. We're so excited to have you all here, but you all have networks and family and friends and folks that you can share this out with. So throughout November, Breaktime on our social media at Breaktime is going to be sharing out a lot of content following up from this conversation about things that everyone should know about young adult homelessness. We have a blog at breaktime.org/blog. And I think through, you know, any ways that you can, spreading the word about this, not only this work, but spreading the word about this issue and what people should know about this issue and the reality and the scope of these challenges, the things that our incredible speakers have shared today, is really, really important. And it's a huge way in which you can have direct impact in this work. So I really want to emphasize that. I want to thank you all again for being here. I also, you know, want to share that we're doing a donation drive this month, and we're collecting new winter clothing items, hygiene items, gift cards, and some other things that we'll be collecting here at the Breaktime space. For those of you who are local, it's 170 Portland Street in Boston. Collecting it from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Monday to Friday. So if you have anything from a new or gently used winter jacket, hygiene items, gift cards, anything that you think could be helpful, we'll be collecting that month and then distributing it to young people experiencing homelessness throughout December. And so another great way that you can get engaged. One final way, again, that you can support the work we're doing is we're running our annual campaign right now with a generous match from two of our incredible donors. And we're trying to expand this work statewide because, as you've heard from other folks today, this is a large issue that spans beyond Boston, across Massachusetts, beyond Massachusetts, across the United States, and even all around the world. And so whatever you can do to pitch in and support, we really appreciate it. Share with your networks the work that we're doing. It's really a collective effort. One of our core values here at Breaktime is collaborative innovation, and we really believe that all of us have to work creatively together to solve these challenges. So we appreciate anything you can do to support this work, whether that's sharing stuff on social media or with your friends, participating in our donation drive, or donating yourself to support the work that we do at Breaktime. But that's all for me today. I'm so grateful again to have all of you here with us. Thank you so much again to our speakers, people who inspire me each and every day. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you so much.